Alright, 16, part 5. I Like Ike. We're still in the 50s. I left you off with the Montgomery bus boycott. If I recall, the next thing should be the Defense Education Act. Something like, see what the exact name is. Yeah. We covered all of D. We'd worked our way through the top three things. On E, we were stopped at the National Defense Education Act. So we were right here when we stopped. So what is the National Defense Education Act? Well, it is largely triggered by this. Sputnik, or Sputnik. We have an actual Russian professor at UNT, and I asked her one day, I said, just how do you pronounce this? And if I recall, because I don't speak Russian, she kind of put the emphasis on Sputnik, I think is how she said it. Sputnik. So what's a Sputnik, or Sputnik? All right. It's an artificial satellite. In fact, it is the first artificial satellite. So I'll give you a little background story here, because that's what I like to do. If there was a geographical year in geophysical, I think. Anyway, in 1957, there was this big push for science. I think it was called International Geophysical Year. Okay, all the countries were think of it as a big science fair. Okay, for countries instead of high school and middle school students. And everybody's supposed to try to do something kind of really neat scientific on this thing. Okay? All right. And so the U.S. had decided it would be really cool to try to launch an artificial satellite. And we were working on this. Okay? We had a project called Vanguard, and we were developing a rocket specifically to launch this satellite. Okay? Now, we had captured, or if they had surrendered to us, at the end of World War II, some of the German rocket scientists had made a beeline for American lines, hoping to get captured by the Americans and not by the Soviets. And we brought these Germans to America, and they were working on rockets for the Army. Maybe I'll talk about this more when we get to the 60s. I don't know if I'll have time or not. And they had said, we can put up a satellite if you want. The U.S. is like going, no, we don't want to use a military rocket because we don't want to seem like we're militarizing space. And so we were proceeding with this, civilian effort. Okay. And then, to our great surprise, while we're still figuring out how to make everything work, the Soviets launch the Sputnik. Okay. Now this thing doesn't do much. It's just a ball with a radio transmitter in it, 4 antennas, and it just goes around the Earth and goes beep, beep, beep. And as it goes overhead, you can tune in your ham shortwave radio into it and hear it go overhead. Okay? It really doesn't do much. It doesn't have to. It's just the fact of getting the first one up was the task to see if you could actually put a satellite in space. Okay, we'll try to do something more complex later. Okay? And so the Soviets have put egg on our face. All right? Remember, this is the Cold War. We're trying to convince the third party, the non-aligned countries in the world, or the third world countries, that the U.S., that capitalism is really the best way to go. And now the Soviets have embarrassed us by putting up a satellite before we do. Okay? And we're like, no. Wait. We can. We're working on a satellite. We got one ready to go too. And so we put the Vanguard satellite on top of a rocket. And we go to launch this thing. Okay. And if I could figure out how to embed videos in here, I'd show it to you. But I don't know how to do that. Maybe I'll figure it out someday. But you can Google it on YouTube if you're really bored. Basically, our satellite, our rocket launches, and it starts to rise from the launch pad and goes and explodes, and the little satellite falls onto the ground and goes beep, beep, beep. Well, great. None of the Soviets now beaten us into space. Our attempt to launch a satellite has failed miserably. We look like a bunch of buffoons. Okay? And so in response to this, the Eisenhower administration does different things. This is when we formed NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, to consolidate our space program, to work on things. Okay. And anyway, kind of going off the tracks there. The important thing for this lecture, taking us on the outline, the National Defense Education Act, and this starts pouring all kinds of money into like the college level, okay, for engineering, okay, studies. Trying to get caught up with, we think the Soviets have better engineers now. Actually, they don't. Yeah, I won't bore you with the details, but we don't know that. There's fear that we're slipping behind, and so this act starts pouring a lot of money into what nowadays we call STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. But it's at the higher upper level, the college level, because those are the people that would be most likely to be able to be engineers in a reasonable time. Okay, but here's kind of where some of that emphasis starts with the National Education Act of 1958 in response to the launching of Sputnik. I don't know if this is in the book or not. I'd have to look. But let's press forward, shall we? Next slide. Continuing Cold War problems. So we're starting to have the idea of peaceful coexistence. Okay. We're kind of stuck on the planet with the Soviet Union. We don't necessarily have to like each other, but maybe we can coexist. Maybe we can agree not to trigger thermonuclear warfare and annihilate each other off the face of the planet. Okay? This means we have to like the communist system. They don't have to like us. But maybe we can kind of get along. It doesn't mean we have to be friends. We can just maybe peacefully coexist. Oh, yeah, we have a dog and we have a cat. Dogs are supposed to be mortal enemies of cats. Our dog and our cat get along fine. They don't really necessarily hang out together. They don't really interact that much. They just kind of pass each other in the hallway, and sometimes they give each other a sniff. It's kind of like peaceful coexistence. We don't have to be friends, but we don't have to be, at each other's throats either. So there's this idea of maybe talking with the Soviets more, trying to interact with them more. Okay. So here's a picture. This is Dwight Eisenhower, the president, and Nikita Khrushchev, who is the new premier of the Soviet Union, or the premier currently. I don't know what happened to Bulganin. I guess he died. Everybody does eventually. And their wives in 1959. So see, they both put on their suits. The ladies have put on their dresses. There's some kind of formal function. I don't know, where this was taken or when, but they're getting together to visit. This might have been when Khrushchev came to the United States. Khrushchev actually came to the United States for a visit. The reason I remember this is because he went to Disneyland. Because who wouldn't want to go to Disneyland? Which was very, very new in the late 1950s, because it opened, I don't know, 55, 56, 57. My mother actually worked at Disneyland shortly after they opened back in the day. So Khrushchev came to the United States at one point. So maybe this picture was taken like at a formal state dinner or something. So we're trying to get along with the Soviets a little more. Another cool thing that happened is the Soviets. There was like this kind of like you go to a World's Fair and there's all these displays from different parts of the world. You go see things. There was this exhibit in the Soviet Union. All right. I don't recall that it was a World's Fair. I think it was just like a cultural exchange type thing or something. Yeah. And the United States built a model kitchen in this display of what a typical American kitchen might look like. Okay. And Vice President Nixon went over to Russia for this thing, and he actually got in an argument with Khrushchev. Not necessarily like a yelling at each other type argument, but a heated debate. Okay. This went on for a couple of days. It ended up with something called the kitchen debate, okay, where Khrushchev and Nixon are in this model kitchen, and Khrushchev is like going, "Oh, nobody really lives like this. No one really has a stove and a refrigerator. Only like the party elite would have something like this." And Nixon's going, "No, this is normal in America. Everybody's got refrigerators and stoves." And it's actually called the kitchen debate, and it Should be in the textbook because I was looking through that part. Okay. So we're trying to find ways to get along. I mean, we can sell the Soviets some grain or something. Okay. We're trying to get along a little better. In fact, there's a summit meeting planned for 1960 that it was, if I recall, was going to meet in Paris, if memory serves me right. But then something happens. Okay. It's called the U-2 incident. Now, what happened is Bono came on stage drunk one night and took a swing at the edge, and bedlam broke out, and the concert was canceled. No, it's a joke. Not the band U2. It's an airplane U2. What is a U2? Well, here's a picture of a U2. A U2 is a high altitude spy plane. It's called U for utility to try to hide the fact that it's really a spy plane. Okay. This thing's got really big wings, you'll notice. It's almost like a powered glider. I mean, it has power, obviously. It has engines. This thing doesn't go real fast. It doesn't carry any weapons. It flies very, very high. Okay. And it can fly over areas we're concerned about and take photographs. Okay. The U-2 flies so high is that we really think it's immune to interception. But by the time somebody figured out there was a U-2 overhead and could get planes up to meet it, it'll be gone. Okay. So it's a spy aircraft. All right. So we've been flying these things over the Soviet Union, taking pictures of what's going on. Because remember, we're in this Pearl Harbor mindset. We're like, geez, we got caught with our pants down on December 7th, 1941. We're not going to let that happen again. I remember, Eisenhower had proposed letting countries' planes fly over each other to make sure nothing nefarious was going on. The Soviets wanted no part of it, but we're going to send it over anyway because we have to make sure they're not massing an attack on, say, the German border or something. Right. So Eisenhower apparently been assured that don't worry that these things fly too high to be shot down for anyone to intercept them. And if anyone ever did get lucky and hit one with a missile or something, it's a flying fuel tank. There won't be anything left for the other parties to point to as evidence. So we're getting ready to have this summit in Paris with Eisenhower and his Khrushchev, and then all of a sudden the Soviets announce they've shot down a U-2 spy plane operating over their territory. Eisenhower's like, well, no, it's a weather plane. It must have blown off course or something, and got lost. And the Russians are like, no, we have the wreckage. It's a spy plane. It's filled with cameras. Oh, and we have the pilot, so we know. Okay. The pilot's name was Francis Gary Powers. And I think there was a Tom Hanks movie out a couple years ago called Bridge of Spies, which I think deals with this. I haven't seen this movie, but some of my students were telling me about it. Francis Gary Powers basically tried for espionage. He's put into prison as a spy. Eventually, we get him back. This is the way things would work during the Cold War. Every so often, the two sides would get together and swap their spies back. Okay. We'll trade you 3 of your spies that we have now for 2 of our spies you have, plus a spy to be named later. And they would do this like a lot of times, like in Berlin, since there's Soviets and Americans in the same city. So anyway, but the summit gets canceled. This is a big embarrassment for the Eisenhower administration because he's been caught in a lie, right? He's been saying it's a weather plane. Well, we can't come out and say publicly we're spying on the Soviets, even though we are. So this is a famous Cold War incident. Okay. Last thing on this slide involves Cuba, which we've talked about Cuba before, but I'm running out of time, so we'll come back and do one last little video here and see if we can't wrap this thing up.